Hello dear friends and welcome to my channel. My name's Michelle. If we haven't met before, I post videos every couple of weeks about my creative processes and also some tapestry tips occasionally, which is what this video is. So I was asked a question about when you would use slits, which is when you've got two colours against each other and you have to sew it up to make the line, or when you would use interlocking, which is basically using interlocking technique so you don't have any gaps, so you don't have to sew any slits. That probably sounds really confusing, so in this tapestry I will show you what I mean, and I will also give you some examples of when you might want to use interlocking and when you might want to use slits. But before we get started, I just want to remind you that if you would like more videos like this, then please subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out. Thank you. Okay, so what is the difference between slits and interlocking? Now, I'll show you this tapestry because this has examples of both. So can you see that this is a really straight line? This is an example of sewing slits. So what that means is that here's the black, here's the grey. If I had left that, it would be a hole. So I sewed them up in order to give that beautiful straight line. If you can see the red, can you see that I've got a straight line on this side, but I don't have a straight line on this side. You can see I've got almost like, they look like little teeth. That's called interlocking. So basically on this side, I didn't have to sew anything. That was enough to keep the fabric strong. The difference is you don't get a nice clean line like you do when you're sewing slits. Right, so how do you know when to use interlocking technique and when to use the slit sewing technique? Now basically it's all about the look that you want to achieve with your tapestry. So many different artists use both techniques and I tend to use a combination of both. But I tend to use mainly sewing slits because usually that gives me the look that I want. So most of my work uses this technique, and I'm going to show you a few examples of where I've got a lot of lines that I would have done a lot of slit sewing. Try saying that 10 times fast. But lately I have been using a little bit more interlocking technique because I have been doing a lot more sort of tonal work where I've got a lot of different greys that are kind of melding in together. I mean, I've always done that, but now I'm trying to use the interlocking technique a little bit more to sort of give it a little bit more variety in the finish, so it's not all just a lot of straight lines. But if you're doing pattern work and your pattern really needs those straight lines to be in it, you really can't get away from it. You have to use sewing slits. But if you're doing more of an organic process, then you can get away with it. It also depends on whether you use very strong colours. So a lot of my slit sewing would have been like black with a lighter colour. So there's no getting away from it. If I did any form of interlocking, you'd definitely be able to see it. Like you could the red with the black. You could definitely see it. In that case, that's what I wanted because I didn't want it to be a very defined line. But if you're looking for something that blends in better together, then interlocking technique could work well for you. You know, there are some artists that use interlocking technique as part of their whole visual language. Erin Riley is a really great example of that, and if you haven't seen Erin's work, you really need to look. I'll leave the link to their Instagram. Their work is amazing, and I've been inspired by Erin since I very first started doing tapestry. They're a very sort of cutting edge artist, really full-on works. A lot of the more conservative tapestry weavers did not like her work when it first came out because it is quite in your face. But if you look at Erin's work, there's a lot of interlocking. I don't even think that Erin ever sews slits. So even when they're doing text, there's always interlocking technique in there. Also, Erin's tapestries are enormous. So the level of detail in these tapestries are huge. So you don't notice the interlocking as much. My tapestries are quite small, so any technique is quite visible in there. If you look at my text-based pieces, you can see that there's no way that I'd be able to use interlocking in these because then I would lose the clean lines of the text. So really, when you say Do you want to use interlocking or slits? It really is about your visual language, the look that you want to have to your pieces. Do you want your tapestries to look really, clean cut, very sharp? Or do you want them to have that kind of fuzzy look? So if you like to have more sort of soft and toned and sort of the colours going into each other, that's a great time to use interlocking. If you want to have very sharp lines, very defined, that's a great time to use slits. Okay, so here's another example of a tapestry that actually does use quite a bit of interlocking. Look at this. There are not many slits in this portion, I think just here. So the rule of thumb for a slit is if the gap is any more than 3 passes, that's when you would have to sew the slit. But this is about 3, so I would have sewn that as a slit. These are all interlocked, so I wouldn't have done any sewing until I got to here. There would have been a lot of sewing slits all the way up there. And also on this side, I've kept it very straight, apart from one little interlocking there for some reason. So there's quite a lot of interlocking in this particular piece. In contrast, there is a lot of slit sewing going on in this piece. As you can see, I would have sewn slits all the way up here with both colours, and on the other side, and the text. I mean, look how sharp the text is. So this would have all been sewing slits. If I had done interlocking, then my text would have looked a bit wobbly. So it's all about what effect you're trying to get. Okay, let's look at some more. So the orange is all interlocked because I wanted it to not look like a sharp edge. It was kind of a shading part of that leg in a weird way. So I wanted that to look a bit more, And then this area here is actually, it looks a bit like interlocking, but it's actually used hatching, which is another technique altogether. That's when I would have had one colour going this way, and then this colour would have been going that way, and then they overlap. And that's a great way of getting some good shading going on. It's not the same as interlocking, but it is kind of a similar principle, if that makes sense. And if you look at one of my old tapestries, back in these days, I never did interlocking. Everything was done with slits. So you've got a lot of straight edges. You've got some hatching, but it's very, even though it looks like it's quite tonal here, there's still a lot of slit sewing going on. If I was doing that now, I would use a combination of both. But back then I wasn't as experienced, and slit sewing was all I was doing when I first started. So you can see how when you're learning, you learn new ways of doing things. I mean, even this area I would have done very differently if I was doing it now. But you know what? I still love this piece. Gotta be honest. So I hope that has helped you when you're designing tapestries. I hope that hasn't confused you more. I will say though that sewing slits is more work because you either have to sew as you go or you need to sew them up as part of the finishing process, but it's worth it. So it's better to do more work. I mean, tapestry is a huge amount of work anyway, so what's a little bit more? But it's better to make the decision first so that you can really envisage what look you want to have for your piece. There's no point saying, oh, I can't be bothered sewing slits, so I'm just going to do interlocking, if it affects the way that aesthetically you want the piece to look, if that makes sense. Am I making sense? I kind of feel like I'm just waffling. Let me know in the comments if you understood a word of what I'm saying. The problem is I was formerly trained in tapestry, but because I'm someone who goes off-piste so much, I kind of forget the rules. And then when someone asks me something which is like rule-based, I kind of go, ooh, I don't know, I just kind of do what I want. So I have to think more about, well, yeah, that is actually a proper technique, and yes, it has a proper name. And so thank you for your questions like this, because they really make me then think about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Because sometimes just saying, oh, I just do it because I want to, isn't the best answer, and it's not very helpful, Michelle. So thank you for making me think a little bit more about my answers. And thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a comment down below if you have a preference between interlocking and slits or a combination of both. Please also let me know if there's any other video you'd like me to do under the tapestry tips kind of heading. I'm not a tapestry teacher, and I have no desire to ever teach tapestry, but I love giving these little tips because it's a good chance to have a bit of a chat and just discuss things that I don't normally get to talk about with anyone else, because tapestry is such a weird medium, isn't it? Until the next video, happy weaving and bye!